There's a lot of system design content online where people are just showing off.
It's just showing off.
They'll take one system, maybe it's Dropbox, maybe it's Netflix, and they'll research it for who knows how long, maybe months.
Take weeks, maybe months.
And they'll examine all the corner cases. So by the time they actually design the system, it's beautiful, it's perfect, and it's completely unrealistic for what would happen in an interview.
Is completely unrealistic.
Meanwhile, if someone who's new to system design interviews sees this, they think, is that the bar that I have to get over to be successful in one of these interviews? We made this video to demonstrate to people who are new to system design interviews what the actual bar to get over to be successful is.
I don't know. Don't you have experts for that stuff?
We found a couple experts who were open to sharing their tips and tricks to teach these people who are new the ropes. These experts both got 10 years of experience. They both worked at big brand name companies like Google and Microsoft, and they both got very different styles. What we asked them to do was design interviewing.io, which technically in this case was actually 3 system design interviews in one. It was design Google Docs, design a remote compiler, and design a recording service. Oh, and by the way, do it in 30 minutes or less.
You have 30 minutes.
The target audience of this video is mid to senior engineers who want to get a job at a FANG company, or maybe just a better opportunity than where they're working now, and who are new to system design interviews. We made this video for you. Now, these experts have no idea what we're about to ask them.
I have no idea what is coming.
We didn't tell them what system they were going to design. They had no time to prepare. They're going to be completely surprised. Let's see what they do. Oh, and by the way, if you enjoy the content, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. If you like what we're doing and you want to hear more about it, you can join our Discord, which is linked in the description below. And if you want to make content with us, let us know.
Okay, Bruno, got a baller of a question for you today.
Okay.
Gonna ask you to design something for me. It's a system design interview. What I'd like you to design is interviewing.io.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's nice. So do you have any specific part in mind, or do you want a general design for like the entire site, right? There are several different parts of the site, right? So yeah.
Good question. Yeah, I'm specifically thinking the interactions where two people get together, code something collaboratively, and then can run that code and have it be recorded and access those recordings later.
Okay, so basically the interview part, including like recording the interview and then being able to retrieve it and play back. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That is.
Okay. I assume I also want to be able to like list the interviews per like interviewer or per interviewee or something like that. You mentioned that we should also like retrieve interviews possibly per interviewee and interviewers. Is that correct?
In this case, when you say retrieve, can you give me a little bit more about what you mean?
Yes, just being able to list them and possibly watch them back, right? Like I'm thinking about the actual interviewing.io interface, right? Where I know you can do that for the interviewee because that's what I have been doing. I never saw the actual interviewer interface, so yeah. That I'm kind of asking mostly because of that. Yeah.
I definitely care more about the interviewer part, being able to collaborate, being able to edit the code. But I do want there to be some sort of blob store or something to be able to handle the recordings that you're just generally overly thinking about. But I don't care about you constructing an interface that allows you to retrieve specific recordings and things like that as well. That's sort of less important in this.
Okay. And just as a general question, can I assume that like authentication and authorization for users is already handled, or do I need to also implement that here?
Good question. You can assume it's handled. We have some sort of API key that's already built in to retrieve videos, and all that kind of stuff is already done.
Okay, cool. So just to simplify, and for the context of what I'm doing here, I assume that I'll get an email address that is already validated and all that, and that email address will be what I will use to refer to specific users. Does that sound okay? Okay,
definitely.
Cool. Perfect. Okay, great. So let's see. Basically, I will actually, I might have more questions here. I just want to get a general overview so we are sure that we are on the same page. So basically, we are going to have like a user and also an interviewee and an interviewer. Interviewee and interviewer. So the first thing that we are going to have is that both will have to access some type of front end where they are going to be able like to, after they logged in, they will join the interview. Oh, sorry. So they will, they will join the interview, right? So there will be then definitely like, so I would just consider one single user here, but the flow should be more or less the same. So we were going to have a user that will talk to a front end. And then, of course, this front end will have service that will back it up so it can present the user interface. So like the obvious one, right? Right out of the bat, the obvious one is that we have the editing window where users can actually type things and show things and all that. So basically, we are going to have some kind of online editor support here, which must support concurrent writing. Do you actually want that? That's how the interface works currently, right? But do you care particularly about this or not?
I definitely do. And I think concurrent writing is a good way to describe it. We'll probably dive into that a little bit at some point.
Oh, cool. Perfect. Great. Okay. So this should be like the meat of it, mostly because this is where most of the interaction happens. So I'll like describe this in more detail later. But other than this, we're also going to have some way to compile. Let's see. Compile and run. And run the code, right? So basically, I'm assuming here we are talking about a coding interview, which is more interesting. But do you do you care about other types of interview? For system design, for example, would have an interface where people can draw things and all that. Do you want me to cover that too, or focus?
No, let's assume it's just data structures and algorithm interviews. Okay. We need to be able to run code, and to even simplify further, I'm okay with saying just like one compiler, so you don't need to worry about like multi-compiler support or anything like that.
Okay, perfect. So we are going to have a single language, right? Like single language, and just to like it will be language X, whatever. Like whenever I talk about the language, it will be some arbitrary language here. But okay. Okay, so we need to do that. We need to have some component that will be able to compile, run the code, and of course, also show results, right? Either errors or the actual success of this, right? Okay, and then let's see. Then at the same time, we need to have something that will be able to store the interview. Basically, it would store whatever happens in the online editor and also voice, right? So because we have also voice here, we also need another service that would be basically the audio support, where we are actually going to allow users to talk to each other. So I think this covers the main features that we are going to support. Is there anything else that is not on this list that you think I should cover? Otherwise, I will run with this, and maybe in the middle of it, I might say, oh, yes, there is also this thing. This is just what I could come up with the top of my head. But yeah.
I think this is pretty good. I think you sort of split it into three major areas: the online editor support, the compiling, and then sort of the storage of the interview. I think these are maybe a good high level way of viewing the problems. So three kind of separate things. If we want to tackle them individually, I would probably expect like different diagrams for different pieces of this system.
Perfect. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so so this service will actually have to support like multiple concurrent interviews. Of course, like there might be more than one interview happening at the same time, but that should be fine. So I'm making an assumption here, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like, but a system like interviewer.io, it might have maybe, let's say, hundreds of users doing an interview at the same moment in time. But it seems unlikely that they would have like hundreds of thousands with like different orders of magnitude, right? Is this a fair assumption? Do you want me to assume that it will have like a reasonable number of users, or do you want me to, just for the sake of it, assume that we are going to have, I don't know, 1 million users doing it at the same time or something like that?
I think talking about how your system can scale and so being forward thinking with how it might scale to 100,000, maybe even 1 million users concurrently would be great. Obviously, for practical circumstances, we're probably not going to have 1 million people interviewing concurrently, but it'd be interesting to see if we can push the limits of what's possible.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I'm actually I'm positive it's going to be. I'm positive it's going to turn out real well because I'm already stressed. I'm more stressed than on any interview I was part of in the past.
Oh no! Oh, I'm about to ask you a hard question too. So,
but it's a good thing because I want to fail. That's how good content is created.
Okay, Dima. I'm going to ask you a question, and the question is a system design question, and the question goes like this: design for me the website interviewing.io.
Ooh. Interesting. I didn't quite expect it, but so quite some time ago. So again, I'll start with disclosures just to get into the zone. I actually believe interviewing.io is an extremely hackishly built tool. And that's a compliment because you guys are trying to stay true to your roots. With this being said, I mean, it's really just keep it in mind that the way I would design it would be different from what it actually is, because I'm an engineer first and I take pride in my engineering solutions working out well. Whereas interviewing.io is a business that is pretty much built from day one to serve a purpose. Nobody really cared about solid engineering, right?
I apologize. Let me rephrase the question. Design Dima's version of interviewing.io the right way. TM.
There's no right way. I mean, I'm fairly positive my way would be the wrong way, because the real one actually took off and is flying high right now. So it's just, look, I would probably not want to design components individually. Like, again, full disclosure, I spoke with Steven when he was working on CoderPad, and I know interviewing.io uses CoderPad extensively. So chances are, I don't want to be the person building that when I can just use some third-party tool, right? And if you start thinking about interviewing.io, I also, like, I guess it's an open secret that, like, we all know, interviewing.io uses Metabase as the backend for some analytical tools and stuff. So if you think about it, honestly, can I open the chat, or is it top secret?
Top secret. We're just talking smack about you.
I mean, if it contains spoilers, I would not open it. Anyways, so my point is, if I'm the business owner who's not tech savvy, who's gonna start interviewing.io a couple of years back, I would do my best to take standard components, make deals, and make friends with tons of different companies, and just patch this together.
Great.
It's going to be a mosaic style patched piece of technology that kind of works, right?
That's an absolutely perfectly correct design decision. But let's say you have to make it all yourself, and you can't. So you have to design all of the components yourself. You can't rely on CoderPad. You can't rely on, like, I mean, just within reason. You can't just make deals to, like, say, I'm going to have Miro I'm going to have CoderPad. I'm just going to integrate with them. So you actually have to design these components yourself. And it needs to scale relatively well, potentially far past what interviewing.io is currently capable of.
That's impossible.
That's why it's fun.
Look, so scale should not be an issue here because we only support 2 people interviews. And even if we do scale to 3 or I dare to say 8 people in the same room, we're not going to be facing the issues of scaling this like Zoom does when you want to have 500 people in the same call.
No, I mean scale by multiple concurrent interviews at the same time. So they'd still just be 2-person interviews, but let's say 100,000 of them going on, whereas interviewing.io is definitely less than that.
Right. But it shouldn't be an issue. As long as you use a proper hosting provider, you can just say, I'm going to pack a certain number of interviews per machine. And if I need to run more concurrent interviews, I use more machines. We will get into stickiness and stuff like that, like reshuffling stuff on the fly, but we actually might skip this part for now. So like even if I'm building this from scratch on my own, I would still try to isolate the components, right? Because chances are.
What are the components in your mind?
So the CoderPad comes to mind first. One of the tricky parts is the VoIP, voice over IP, when you actually hold a call. And I think I would say plus the phone, which is actually a tricky thing by itself, especially when you want to jump between one and the other. The whiteboarding, of course. I'm kind of inclined to say I would rather build it better than the stuff I know how it works. But yeah, we shouldn't go there. So that's what the user sees, right? We have the website. You guys know me well by now. I don't think it deserves much attention if it can be done as a WordPress plugin. So I mean, there's not much concurrency, right? There's not many things. So if I'm the interviewer or if I'm the candidate, there's not many things I can do on the website that immediately has to be transactionally concurrent with other stuff. So that's what the user sees.
For the sake of the argument, let's assume we don't care about the website. We won't use whiteboarding. And for voice over IP, I'm okay with you saying that we use some sort of service for this. It's not something I want you to deep dive into. But certainly it's something that we care about, but not too much. There are, I think, a couple other components beyond this, though. Maybe from the user's perspective, but also just generally.
Thank you. You're making my job slightly easier. So now we get to focus on what people do not see generally, which I know should be built if I'm the guy behind interviewing.io. So I don't have this full structure in my mind, so I'll just keep talking, and eventually I'll say something stupid. Please don't stop me too soon. Yeah. Internals. So one thing that comes to mind right away is, what do I start from? I'm tempted to say schedule. Because imagine interviewers with interviewees, all the calendar.
Let's care more about the interviewing piece specifically, and then the ability to maybe replay that later. You can assume that we care more about the actual sessions than we do about the scheduling.
Well, this reduces the problem to be like 95% about CoderPad. And I happen to know this thing called operational transformation, OT. That's, I believe, how Google Docs work internally. That's the idea that if you have there's a joke in late 90s that IRC is just a multiplayer notepad. So like when you want to have a multiplayer notepad, what you do is when you begin thinking how to actually make it possible for different people to edit document concurrently, so that you could type stuff, then you could Control Z or Command Z to undo some typos, and this should work across multiple people. Once you begin thinking about this, you immediately arrive at this design that I think these days would be best to describe as Git branches and merge conflicts. So you have this idea that each individual user kind of has their own local history. Mm-hmm. As long as they don't intersect, we don't really care about latency and drop packets. It can all be reconciled later. Once they do intersect, shit hits the fan. But to be honest, like, let's get back to CoderPad in our interviewing setting. We only have 2 people. And I would go as far as saying that if the interviewer starts typing, if the interviewer is arrogant enough, type something on top of what the candidate types, I would just say that candidate has priority. So, I mean, I probably don't want if I'm the interviewer, I don't want to lose the data I've typed in there, but you can just leave it in the comment next line or copy paste it somewhere into chat or whatnot. So I mean, all this conflict resolution thingy becomes almost non-existent.
We're 8 minutes in.
Cool. So just to be slightly more direct, to make sure we have a clear direction going here, I'm going to state explicitly, we care about the coder pad. We also care about the ability to sort of replay the events later on. That kind of comes in two flavors. The call, we need to be able to replay, and then we also need to be able to like replay the state of the editor at particular timestamps. And then beyond that, there's also code compilation, which is not something that you mentioned, but I do want to just explicitly state is something I care about, just for the sake of time here and to make it your design look somewhat close to what Dima's is. So I'm a little bit guiding you here, but
yeah, it's my bad, right, for not being upfront about this stuff. So all of these are trivial-ish to me individually. So syntax highlighting and stuff like that, trivial. Compiling the code, that's the weak version of Online Judge, not too difficult, it's interactive. Replayability of the edit window itself, kind of trivial because we have this operational transformation, so we just record the stream. If I'm designing this from scratch, I would actually not separate the event logs at all for all textual content. So whether I'm typing something or pressing compile, whether the output is on the coder screen or on the terminal or in the chat or in my annotations, which we also have in interviewing.io, I would say screw it, it's going to be the same event stream and it's always replayable from any point in time. The trick here is to align this with sound. So when you want to replay the interview, chances are you want to be able to synchronize. Well, there are no lips, it's anonymous and no human, no picture. But you want to synchronize voice with the content of the actual coder path. That's where things could get tricky, but again, not too tricky because there's no need to synchronize it like to a millisecond. Like split second would be fine. So honestly, none of this sounds difficult to me individually. So I guess the trick is to find the right combination of where the complexity hides. So I want code syntax highlighting.
Hey, Dima, it's been 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
We have 20 minutes left.
I'll do my best to make good use of this time, but honestly, especially if you keep guiding me, Mike, I can hardly think what can take more than 5-10 more minutes. I need to be able to run this code in an interactive setting. There are all sorts of online judge thingies. So you have like CPU bounds, RAM bounds, right? Sandboxing. So you can really use disk or network, you can drop a database, stuff like that. Standard thingies, nothing specific to interviewing.io. So the playability I already suggested I would like to do, so audio stream aside. A single replayable, totally ordered event log of whatever, of everything. See, I'm stressed. Which includes code, run attempts, console output, chat and notations, whatever reaction. I mean, this includes error messages, etc., and notations. What else? What else do we have? So annotations, you pick a category 1 of 3, and it could be positive or negative or neutral. Honestly, again, none of this seems extremely difficult to me.
Let's assume, again, we simplify and don't care about the annotations or the chat. Let's just assume we can run code and then upload code. It'd be interesting to see how these systems play together in a sort of diagram. I'd say this is a good point to cut to talking about sort of what that high-level design kind of looks like, just so we have a comparison with Bruno's as well. But can we talk about how these components kind of interact with each other, what the flow might look like? And then I want to kind of deep dive on a couple of specific topics in the last 10 minutes or so that we have as well.
Yeah, I'll start drawing in a moment. I'm just thinking what could be the tricky part. So one thing that comes to mind is, you mentioned concurrency. If you have this running, if you want to run 1 million interviews concurrently, it's a bunch of machines and some may die in the midst of an interview. So I could think of a design which would try to make it almost unnoticeable to the users. Again, there would be an overkill because the users honestly don't really care if they are interrupted by for a couple of seconds with a message saying, please reconnect, please wait. So, and as always, it's far easier to do it this way compared to proper seamless transition. So that's pretty much the only thing that is tricky because it makes me focus on proper storage persistence layers.
Okay, so then, okay, I'm going then to try to draw a design here if I know how to do drawing. There you go. Okay, so okay, so I'll try to draw here the main components. It will be very simple, so I'm just going to do this. Sorry, oops, sorry. Wrong keys.
You might want to do one per like major kind of part of the system we're talking about,
okay.
rather than try to do it all on one canvas.
Okay.
Canvas doesn't extend.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
10
okay,
minutes
so
in.
let's see.
10 minutes in.
Okay, so basically, why is it not Control-C? Okay, now it worked. That's what I want. Okay, I just creating some space here. Okay, so I will tackle each one of the parts. Right, first we are going to have like the online editor, and this is probably the only one where I will actually make a point of just mentioning like I'll talk as users, like one of the users is the interviewer, the other user is the interviewee for the purpose of this exercise here. They should more or less have the same features, right? Like both can write to the screen, both can execute code, both can end the session if needed, right? So I'll just say user 1, user 2, and like the features should be the same, right? So that is perfectly fine. So basically, these two users would actually talk then, as I mentioned, with at first with the general front end here. This front end is obviously like a distributed piece of infrastructure. So for the purpose of this, I will put it as a black box here, right? We can, if we have time later, we can try to like make it like to give it a specific dimension to see how many like service we would need and all that. But because I will be more worried about allowing it to scale than to have a correct number of instances right off the bat, then I will not discuss this at this point in time. But we can get to it like later, right?
Sounds
so
good.
Basically, yeah, these users, they are already authenticated. So at some point they would click a link, and that link would allow them to just go and like connect to a single user section. Right? So they talk to the front end, and then whenever one of them joins, right? Let's assume the first one joins, then there will be there will be a specific and these I will discuss with like in the database design, but basically there will be the concept of a user session here, of an interviewing session, right? So basically this would start a session for the purpose of this, because we will always have a one-to-one user. We can assume that this session will be handled in a single machine. There will be a master machine that will have the session, right? I think the main thing that we need to worry about here is that one user might be in the US, the other user might be in Japan, right? Like, so you don't want the user in Japan connecting directly to a machine in the US, right? So let's think of this session as a logical thing right now, and then I will address the cross-region issue here, right? But basically, whenever our users connect, like the first one connects, then we have the session basically set up here, right? And as soon as the two users connect, right, then we have the actual start of the interview, right? At this point in time, one important thing that we are going to happen is that we need to have our like recording support here, and like I will detail the things later, but basically we are going to have a recording service that will basically be notified at this point to just go and start recording the session, right? The way that I see this working is mostly in terms of like text. What is going to happen is that whenever a user types something, right, And then I hand waving the concurrency thing at this point, but whenever a user types something, it will notify the session about what has been typed, right? So, and just to get this right off the bat, one way that we can do the concurrency, like there are probably details to flesh out, but generally speaking, instead of sending like a single keystroke, we can potentially like batch keystrokes and send like from time to time, but basically put a timer there, right? Whenever the user types 10 characters, and I'm guessing here at this point, just send the 10 characters. An important thing is that you need to send the actual position on the editor that the text is being typed, right? The main reason for that is because the other user might be typing and you don't want to just like jumble everything together. Like that might still happen because like users might be clicking around and then like typing things, but you try to make it better. So if your user is typing in one line and the other user is typing in a different line, then everything should work smoothly because they would not override each other, right? Basically, there will be the position on the screen doing that. But anyway,
let's just assume, and just to jump in for a second, let's assume that we'll deep dive into that concurrency thing during the last part of the interview. But right now, let's hand wave it. I do want to point out that there is a specific feature within interviewing.io where you have the recording and you get the audio, which is synced to the time that the interview occurs. But you also have the ability to scroll through the document and actually access the editor as like what was the state of the editor at minute 1.1, minute 1.2, so on and so forth. So we need to definitely be able to store, like we're recording kind of two things, audio and then like the editor state. So just if you say the recording service, I'd love to expand just from a high level perspective, how this might kind of handle that.
Perfect. Okay, I'll do that. So let me do this just so we can do that like in a quicker way. What I'm going to do here is that I'm just going to the audio will be handled separately. Main reason for that is that like we are going to use something like WebRTC or something like which is like a web streaming protocol. So like we're not going to deal with video, but we can reuse it for audio anyway. And basically what it does is that whenever the session is started, we also start like recording the audio, right? So audio recording will happen here, like mostly because this is from a lower level perspective. What would happen is that user one actually has a WebRTC connection to here, and user two, and also user one, right? So basically what that means is that they are using, after they establish the connection, the front end will get out of the audio path because it will be handled by this component, and it will mostly be used to handle the actual interface, which is mostly the typing, right? So basically this will record the audio, and it's very important. So the session here, and I understand what you mentioned, basically we need to also have timestamps related to what is happening. So whenever we are recording something, whenever we get a new action, like someone typed something, like anything that changed the state of the session happens, then we are going to record the actual timestamp, and that will be like sent to the recording service too, right? The audio, it's the same thing, like basically, but audio is constant, but we are always like streaming with like timestamps are implicit here because it's audio. Audio has a certain bit rate that should be more or less constant, and then you can infer audio. But we can also insert like timestamps just to make sure that it will not get out of sync, right? Because that could happen potentially. So basically, audio would also be like sent to the recording service. Is just as a different type of data, right? It would be more of like the streaming type instead of an event-based thing, right? And then you mentioned that we are going to go into details in this later, so I'm not going to explain how I'm considering doing it right now. But okay, so yeah, just moving on. The other part that I had mentioned was, and of course I now have a window. Let me. Does this work? Oh yeah, it works. So
18 minutes in.
compiling and run. Okay, so this is an important part, right? So basically this is handle the user interaction, right? So like mostly making sure that we can record what is happening, and we can record the audio too, right? Besides that, our front end will have a button, let's say a compile button, right? Where we can then tell it to go and compile the code, right? To do that, we are going to have another component here. Let's call it let's call it compiler, just for the sake of it. It's a good name, I guess, for this thing anyway. And which is a fun part, like the most difficult part of software engineering, as all of us know, is like naming things, right? But yeah. So anyway, so we are going to have a compiler. So the compiler itself is triggered by the front end. Like I probably should have been marking these lines, explaining what they are. Like I might get back to it, but like it can be inferred from what I'm talking anyway. But basically, there is a button, like someone clicks compile. This will basically send whatever is the current state of the code to this compiler instance here. And then what it does is like, it's pretty trivial. It's just as expected. It will try to compile the code and then will execute it. That is one big caveat here. There is a huge security issue here because of, obviously, it is compiling user provided code. And like the user might send some code that calls system, like rm-rf / like, and then you like screw with your service, right? So we need to run this inside a sandbox. And this is so important that I'm going to actually make a note of this. We run into a sandbox. So a very good candidate for this, which doesn't exist anymore, is something that Google did called NACL, which was basically a sandbox that ran on web. And you could run like C code there, assuming that you're doing C, right? Well, any compiled language actually it would support, but still C was the main objective, right? So, but the important part is that we should allow the user to run as much code as they can, right? Just for the sake of it, because they might try to do something that requires some specific code. But at the same time, we need to protect the environment, right? Realistically speaking, like the user doesn't need to have access to anything like writing files or doing anything. So we could potentially just disable all of those things and just leave the actual computational part of things, right? Like you compile things, you do that, and you write algorithms and data structures, and that's all you need more or less, right?
And,
so, yeah.
And just to clarify for this, you mentioned the sandbox. I'm curious. There, you could potentially sanitize the input ahead of time and then just put it in something. Or you could put it in a sandbox that can crash safely. Do you think there's kind of one solution better than another here, or do you think there's one, or should you do both, or what would you suggest?
Yeah. So from a purely security standpoint, we should do both, right? The problem with doing the sanitation, like trying to sanitize the input, is that might lead to unexpected situations, right? This is the law of least surprise, right? What might happen is that the user wrote some code, right? So they run that code. The code is correct, but then it fails, and it will give like a compilation error or all that. So if we are going to do sanitize the code before, we most likely want to explicitly tell the user about some change that was made before the code was sent there. Because if you don't do it, the user will be surprised. Like, why is it not working? Like, it's just a hello world. It should like do whatever you want, right? So yes, like so sanitization is a lot easier. Like you can do that like in a pretty simple way. Like as long as, like if you really know everything that you cannot permit, then that is trivial, right? Like you're going to like walk through the code and eliminate anything that you can't run, right? But if you don't know, if you are not sure, a sandbox is a better idea, because the idea of a sandbox is just that you can throw anything at it, right? Like it will do whatever you tell it to do. But hopefully there is not a sandbox escape exploit there. And then you're restricted to that environment, right? Worst case scenario, you're going to like kill that sandbox instance, and then another one would need to be created, right? So from a complexity standpoint, like sanitizing is better than doing the sandbox. From a security standpoint, the sandbox is better. From a general paranoid standpoint, you just do both, as long as you tell the user that, hey, your code changed. This is what is being compiled, right? But yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah, great. No, I think that's perfect. So at this point, I think I've got a good idea of the general high-level design here. Are there any clarifying things you'd like to add to this, any additional details you'd like to provide? I do want to kind of deep dive into the concurrency issue. This would probably be a separate diagram, or maybe it's just situation that we talk about, but are there any things you'd like to add to the diagram or complexities you'd like to point out?
Okay, so I just added like this. Whenever we compile it, we need to send the output to the front end, right? Because we are going to send the output to the front end, that will trigger the same event as if someone had typed it, and then we could potentially just piggyback on that to also record it. So basically, we make sure that the recording service is also recording the result of the compilation without too much work. Like we don't need to like explicitly send the result here, right? As long as we are doing that, we mark that as an event, and then it will be automatically processed there. So about specific questions that I might have, let me just think for a while. So I think this covers the overall design. So we have this. So there is one feature that we have there that we didn't mention. I would mention it because it's simple. Like the user might decide to share or not whatever they are doing. Like that would also be just a button, and basically what we would do is just record if both users opted to share that recording, and then we add this as metadata to the recording service, right? Like, and yeah,
cool. And we can not worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like
perfect.
The post process.
Cool.
Okay.
So one thing that I didn't cover at all here is basically that database design for this. So I don't know if you want me to go like, so yeah, I'll do like it like as quickly as I can, but it should not be like very complicated. Let me just do this.
Maybe just high level.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So basically, yes, we are going to have like we are most likely have to have like some kind of object store, and mostly for the audio, because the audio, depending on the encoding, the audio will definitely be like a lot more data, relatively speaking, than the actual like text data that is recorded during the interview. Simply because audio.
Bruno, I apologize. I'm going to cut you off. I realize we're short on time. Okay. I do care about the storage, but I care more about concurrency, and I'd like to deep dive on that.
All right, enough talk. Let's do the drawing. By the way, I can share the link to this, although I think my screen is good enough. You guys likely have 4K monitors. I have Full HD, so you should see everything.
Good enough for me.
Drawing. What do I do? How do I do to begin with? I'm going to have database. I'm going to draw a single node, and then I'm going to talk about how to orchestrate them. Yeah, I'm going to draw a single node. It has some local database, and it's going to synchronize. So there are multiple of this. I hope it doesn't require special. Good. Print it front. Print to front. And now this guy. Yeah. I'm going to have a local database. And it's going to synchronize with the Cloud DB. What does this guy have? So again, the web part is static HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or whatnot. So it doesn't need to be part of this component. We only focus on the data part. For the data part, what I have is, ooh, they're so big. What I have is, full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of monoliths designed for a specific targeted purpose, because I think latency matters in many cases. But I guess for the interview, I'll try to think of potential micro services, even though in my mind they would be on the same, like Docker Compose, talking to each other locally. So I do have this coder pad, right?
Yep.
Which is what? Code highlighting, choose language, etc. I'm going to ignore I feel like not ignoring them, but I guess imagine there's an extra box here with annotation, chat, and whatnot. I'm going to have now the big question becomes, is it one-to-one between interview nodes and code running nodes? And I would say, no, it's not. So I would say what happens is, for this part, I have another thingy, which is interviewing.io user code execution node. These guys, this arrow, I'll do it better. You could split this by language. In theory, I could just write here, I guess. Could split by programming language. What else can you do? I'm tempted to say you could split by compiled versus interpreted, like shell REPL versus reruns, but I don't think it's important. The thing is, I don't necessarily care how isolation works here, that you can easily imagine these are either Docker containers or, if it's a box down language, like a managed language like .NET, you can actually share the same machine if you trust its own isolation. For the sake of, without loss of generality, let's assume they're at least Docker containers, just to keep it simple. You could think of them as dedicated temporary nodes, EC2 nodes, or even, it's suboptimal, but it's possible, or even lambdas. And AWS lambdas, if it's really short-lived thingies. Honestly, all these again are, this would play if we're talking about cost optimizations later on. So
can you elaborate just for a second on why you'd Dockerize this? Like what's the reasoning behind it? I'm not saying it's wrong. Like I think it's a good idea, but can you explain why you said that?
I'm trying to think as if it's an outline job, in which case runtime matters. I know it's not necessarily true for interview.io. I've had an interview a while back when I was coaching someone how to tell order of n squared, and we were trying to do order of n squared operations in Python, and it turns out the timer is not reliable. But I'm trying to design my thing so that whatever runs for 2 seconds should actually run between 1.9 and 2.1, and not like suddenly 10 times slower. For this, proper isolation matters. I actually do want to make sure the resource allocation to different runners is fair-ish. I don't like if I wrote some bad code that is abusing whatever parts of CPU and it's slowing down everybody else, I want to limit the negative effects of this piece of code as seen by other customers. Yeah, I guess at this point, the biggest idea would be data ownership. So I would say there's an API here. Is this a proper way to draw it? Do I have it? Yeah, I got a two-sided one. So I would say, let this thingy, let this thingy, let this left-hand side, this interviewing.io interview node, let this thingy to be the runner, the data authority. Let it be the owner of everything. My rationale is quite simple. These nodes are fungible. So ideally, you want to have some stickiness. Let's start writing here. I see I'm stressed. I'm not phrasing myself well. So I'd like the interview nodes are the source of truth data-wise. What I mean by this is the relationship between this left-hand side node and the right-hand side node is a nice to have. There's no must-have stickiness. if this guy on the right dies, which will happen eventually, or if it has to scale up, this interview node can just reconnect to a different one. It will need to resend pretty much all the code, but honestly, that's details. I mean, you can even think that the first version would always send all the code from here to here, because I assume it's going to be single-digit kilobytes.
Yep.
But to be a good citizen, I would say, hey, the session is in progress. This component can only receive updates like deltas. But now when I think about it, I have a better idea. Let's do it like this. Let's do a proper fancy design. Proper fancy design would be, ta-da, is it sharp? Yeah. Message queue, also known as Kafka, or something like that. My point is, I want it to be a single unique event bus. So the way it usually runs, it's kind of the field I'm really, really passionate about, so I can talk about this for hours. But the way it usually works is, in the modern world of event sourcing, you have snapshots. You're too big. Something like this. And they are going along the time axis, right?
Yep.
So you can think of this as a time.
Yep, with you so far. And each snapshot is a point in time of the code.
That's a good question, because it boils down right away to whether you have multiple topics here, multiple partitions, or just one thingy. How many of them do you have? Ideally, so my preference would be to keep a small number of partitions here, so that each snapshot here would be some universal timestamp time frame, but not for a single interview, but for a large chunk of them. Okay. So on the one hand, we can scale up so that we can handle a lot more concurrent interviews. On the other hand, we don't waste a lot of topics, a lot of snapshots for each individual interview. The point is, this Kafka is a source of truth.
Yeah. Just to more directly go, and we can move to it. I think at a high level this makes sense, but there are one or two just specific questions I want to ask before we pivot a little bit, and that's kind of just around the nature of sending this code, and if there are any high level kind of worries, concerns, things to just address about this that maybe you mentioned one or two of them at the beginning of the call, actually, so maybe just calling them out explicitly here would be a good idea.
Yeah, what I think I should mention explicitly is that if you do it this way, which is my favorite way, you have this event sourcing. The API doesn't really contain the code. There's no need to send in the blob of code. The API just tells the right-hand side component that at certain timestamp of certain offset of certain topic within this Kafka, which this right-hand side guy may want to take from certain snapshot, or it can just replay this part from the log left to right. But it doesn't matter. The API semantics is that at certain index of this history of certain interview, the user, the interviewer or the candidate, they did like command enter, or they pressed the run button. So please do run this thing and produce the output. That's the key part of my design. The rest of the details.
A little bit. You think we can exit out of this diagram and then just talk through a couple of concurrency scenarios?
Yes.
We got 4 minutes left.
Okay.
4 minutes. Okay, great. So there's a fundamental problem with collaborative editing, and it's where you type something on one line and then I try and overwrite something on the same line. And I'd like to just talk about, like, how do we handle that? Like, what are strategies of dealing with this kind of thing? And what's gonna, like, obviously latency is a huge issue. So how do we kind of handle this, but handle it quickly and resolve these concurrency problems?
Okay, cool. So there are two main cases here that are interesting that I'm going to go over. The first one is just like both users are connected to the same data center, right? So that is a simple user, because then like we can simply use literally the same session for both users. So like whenever user 1 or user 2 types, like they will get, like, the session itself will get a timestamp of anything that they typed plus what they typed, plus, as I mentioned previously, but this would be a better place to say that, the actual position on the screen where you're doing that, right? One thing that I would probably not do is send keystroke by keystroke, because like we don't need to do that. We don't need like keystroke resolution. So what I would do is that I would send, let's say, I don't know, I would wait for half a second, and then I would batch whatever keystrokes there were in half a second, and then I would send that, right? So what we would have in the end is something like user 1, and then we would have like position on the screen, and then we would have the actual data, right? Oh, and we also have we have a timestamp before that, and then the user, and then we have position and the actual data that was typed, right? And then if we do this, right? If you do it's something like this, then if we have multiple users, right? Like the first thing that we are going to do is that because they are on the same machine, we can actually rely on the timestamp, right? Like the session machine would take care of that. So basically we have everything ordered by timestamp. Whenever we want to replay what has been done, we use the timestamp, and we also always use the position to like write data to the screen. It's always insert, just to simplify things. So there will be no overriding. The worst case scenario, we are like someone is typing, and then we type something, and then we are going like to split it apart. But that is the nature of two people doing the same thing, right? But that is not the most interesting part. The most interesting thing from my point of view, the most interesting one is if like one user is in like say USA and the other user is in Japan, right? What makes this interesting is mostly that because they are far away, right? Like we can't expect one user to talk to the same session server on the other side of the world. So basically, how I see it working is that, and I'll just explain it just not to waste time. We are close to the timeline, but to the deadline. But mostly, I would have like 2 session service. One session service is running on like close to one user. The other session service is running close to the other user, and then there would be like they would exchange messages whenever needed, right? So they would still like exchange messages. Like audio can be recorded separately because we can always like merge it later eventually, like assuming we have a distributed service to store things. But anyway, so basically we would have the close to the user, so the user see what they type, right? And they would see the result. The main problem with that is because the latency is big between the two, there might be some janking in this, like when the user types something, it saw this as in a specific way, but because both sides didn't agree with the timeline, like they did it at close to the same time from the perspective of each user, so it might be that one user sees something jumping. One important thing that we need to make sure here is that no matter if that happens, so the janking is fine as long there is eventual consistency, meaning that both users should at some point see exactly the same thing, right? We can't have a long-lasting state where users are completely off one from the other, right? That could potentially still happen when you have a partition, but then if that happens, like eventually when they connect, everything would just magically like fall into places, and then you would actually have some consistency state. You could reuse the timestamp and like how you synchronize timestamp. Like there are specific methods to synchronize timestamps across data centers. They are not like infallible, but then you are going to use some type of election system to figure out who won or who lost, right? Like Paxos or Raft or anything like that. And then you use that to replay everything, basically. That's the general.
That's awesome. What were you thinking for the precision on the timestamp? How precise do you think we need to be?
So because I'm batching things, like I mentioned, like half a second, I would most likely do, just for the sake of it, I would do the timestamp at around the same resolution. There are trade-offs of using too high of a resolution because then it's more likely that it will not match between the service, and also using a 2-course resolution, because if you do that, then you might have like, it's more difficult to actually get things in the right order, right? Simply because a lot can happen in a longer window. So I would most likely use like half a second too, mostly because I decided to use half a second for batching keystrokes, but yes.
Awesome. I think we're right about at time. So this is a great stopping point. Cool. Does it matter at all what's in those snapshots? Do you have any kind of concerns about problems? I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the only problem the snapshot solve is to not have every component to play everything from scratch. That's it's somewhat a religious question. There's no consensus in the industry so far. My preference actually is that as long as each let's say topic. So yeah, what you could do is the following. Again, I'm making this up, but what you could do is the following: shard events by topics into a small number of topics. So let's say it's going to be simple in a couple of moments, bear with me. So the idea is that we have certain scale. At some point, so when we run like 2 interviews concurrently, I can just have a single linearizable history of whatever events happening that take place in all the interviews. So I can totally say that if I'm interviewing you and Kevin is interviewing Kyle, you're just on my screen, sorry. These 2 all the events of both interviews can be linearized into a single sequence. So they interleave in a certain fixed way, because we know for a fact that first Dima pressed this button and then Kevin pressed that button. Eventually this becomes pointless because all the interviews combined are too much of a data stream to follow. There's no reason to make it a single data stream. So you shard it, but they shard it into a small-ish number of topics. It would, I use the term topic because it's going to be a Kafka topic. Could be a Kafka partition, honestly, it doesn't really matter at this point. The point is, it's going to be a small-ish number. It could be like 4 or 8, not 100. In which case, the design I personally like would be the following. Each code execution node is just tied to one partition. So it can keep the snapshots inside itself. I'm not going to copy paste it. And if you need to restart this node for a given partition, it can take its own previous snapshot and replay the rest from the Kafka stream, in which case this storage is kind of local to the node. So you don't need this global snapshots. They are localized to a node.
Yeah.
I guess I'm allowed to do this, right? That should be number 3. You can say these guys are sharded by partition.
You're at 27 minutes.
Great.
Yeah,
we'll pivot. We'll give you maybe just another couple of minutes because there's one other kind of key topic I want to talk about at this point. So within the editor, and keep in mind, some of these things I'm asking just to understand like your understanding of these things. So I think you've said a couple of things are trivial, but I'd still like to talk about them, even if you view them as trivial. When it comes to like the actual editing, there are issues when you have 2 users editing the same thing. And I'm wondering if you can maybe describe just at a high level, like what are those issues? Like what issues do you kind of foresee coming up? And then like how do we resolve them? What are standard ways within the industry that we can resolve some of these problems?
The short universal answer is CRDT.
Fantastic. Can you spell that out for folks that don't know what that is?
Conflict resolving data types, I believe.
Yep, you're right. What is that? Can we talk about that for a minute?
So it's the idea that if you have this event log, if you have it's not that. So if you have the API where you just tell it what happens and then it happens, then you need to make sure it processes events sequentially, one after the other. Because at some point, if they are concurrent, if they are overlapping time, bad things happen. But sometimes serializing, it's called serialization. This word has multiple meanings. Everybody knows it. It's a terrible word. What I mean here is that serialized, as in you can put a fixed order to them. A happened after B, after B happened after A, strictly after B ended, A has started. If you can serialize your stuff, pretty much the rule of thumb these days is please do. But sometimes you cannot afford it because the concurrency factor is too high. In which case you need to have a smaller granularity of what can possibly conflict with each other. And conflicts are unavoidable. So like hypothetically, let's say we're talking about a Google Doc. You can have a whole document as a lockable entity. One person can edit this document at the same time. Or you can say, I'm going to boil it down to a paragraph. Or you can say, I'm going to boil it down to a sentence. Eventually you get down to a single character. But still there could be conflicts. Like you're typing something and I've just deleted the whole paragraph. Sometimes it's possible to come up with a heuristic which can merge conflicts on the fly with seemingly no data loss. A trivial example here would be if you have like a counter. So if you need to count number of hits on some page, if 2 people concurrently visit the same page and the counter is incremented in 2 places concurrently, you can just increment it by 2. So you don't care in practice in which order did you do this increments, right? So with respect to editing, conflicts are unavoidable. We all know Git merges can be painful. But again, as I said before, in this particular exercise, I could just say it's just two people, and the interviewer could have precedence. So if there's a conflict, I just leave whatever the other person typed in like a comment section below, so that the work is not lost, and I'm done with that. It usually happens in practice. So it's a lot easier to reason about this when you imagine there is a poor network connection. So suddenly somebody was like on the wireless internet, and this person is offline for 30 seconds, and bad things happen. So you need to have a design which does not lose people's work, and at the same time they don't step on each other's toes. That's what CRDTs could help with if you could come up with a simple heuristic.
Awesome. I think this is a great stopping point here. So the deep dive is kind of good. We were able to talk about some of the major things that we talked about with Bruno as well. So let's say we stop that interview and then transition to people's questions.
Hey, this is Brett. My question is about the storage. Is it normal to save the audio and the text plus the timestamps separately instead of just recording video and then being able to play it back? It seems like it'd be a much simpler design, even if it's not optimal storage wise. So I wondered about your thoughts on that.
So it's a bit, so the main reason why we have two different ways to record data here and why I went with that, like I agree with you that we could potentially just say, you know what, record the entire screen with audio and like be done with that, right? But like it's mostly because of it being a bit wasteful if you think about that, right? So they are inherently different data types, right? So the text, as I mentioned, would be an event-based thing where from time to time I would just send like whatever was typed, right? If not, nothing was typed, I wouldn't send anything. And for the audio, it's a constant stream, right? So one thing that I mentioned that is relevant in this context is that like you don't necessarily need the timestamp for the audio, because in theory, the audio itself has a built-in timestamp, right? Because it has a certain specific bit rate. But the problem is that there might be like connection blips where you lose connection for a while, or it slows down and then it needs to catch up. So you need to manually insert some actual like timestamps just to make sure that from time to time you can catch up. You can make sure that the audio and the string, the text are synchronized. So to answer your actual question, it could go either way. This way is a bit more complex, I agree with you, but it gives you the advantage that you're not using more data than you use, including storage, internal bandwidth in the servers and all that. And while the other way is simpler, but then, well, it's kind of simpler, right? Because you also need a solution to recording the actual screen for the user, right? But still, you could use WebRTC to do both, as I suggested for all.
And just to point out with this, because it was a good question, but a real important call out here is a core feature of interviewing.io is when you replay the videos, you get the audio. It's not actually a video that you see; it's audio, and then it's the editor with like things happening live in it. But you could like actually click the editor and like highlight the a certain part of the text and copy it out, because it's actually an editor that's being like replayed of what's actually happened, like a replay of what's happened. And that's like a unique feature that a lot of people actually care about. He didn't call it out in this, but that was actually an important feature to be able to do. So the fact that he split it was a good thing. Also, just from a strict storage time perspective, like if you're doing audio, it's like 150 megabytes per hour to store audio. But if you're talking about video, it's like gigabytes per hour, so it's much cheaper to store text, especially at a big scale. So absolutely the right choice what Bruno did. But it will be simpler if you need to. But
yeah. And also you actually mentioned the feature in interviewing.io. Like I failed to mention it now, but you did mention it when we were discussing the thing. So yeah, cool, good. Does that answer your question, Brett? It was Brett, right? Like I assume, yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool, perfect, cool. Thank you.
I have a question, Bruno, and if it's too open-ended, you can let me know. But I definitely could see that like you went from the functional requirements and the user stories and kind of already knew where you were headed with interviewing.io, but your main concern with the concurrency and the concurrent writing seemed to be with like the position of the cursor and is there anything else like that you were concerned about in terms of all the other, scalability concerns that you would want to call out?
Yes, that is a good question. That is something that I hand waved during this due to time limitations, which is like, it's common to happen on system design interview. I'm just a victim of this right now. But yeah, so basically, generally speaking, and this is something that I always tell anyone that I interview, right? Doing this very high level design of like how things should look like in the end is fine for like, you should actually start with that. Like, you should only go to the actual, hey, yes, but you know what? This obviously, it must be a scalable solution. So I need to have things in place to actually take care of that. So for example, we would have like a zookeeper orchestrator that would be able to figure out like how many tasks we need given the current load that we are taking, right? So everything here would be multiple tasks, right? Everything that is here, like the session manager is multiple tasks. This is the easy one because it's one per session, right? Like at least, or if you have different regions, then you have two, but yeah. And then audio, you're going to have like, you can also do per user. It might be wasteful. I would have to give more consideration on that, but it could go either way. It could be one audio thing to record multiple streams, or simply one dedicated to that user, right? If it goes down, something needs to come up again. So basically, we would use an orchestrator to just bring things up again if something that happened. The compiler itself can also be per section, and this is a one-shot thing, right? We can literally just fork a compiler. Like, we can do a separate service, that's fine, especially if we want to collect like statistics and things like that. But this potentially could be literally like compile this thing, right? Because we talk about sanitizing and sandboxing, it's mostly likely a separate service anyway. But it would also be like, it would be fired whenever we need to compile things. It should be pretty quick to bring this up. So to answer your actual question, like, yes, there are a lot of different like distributed system design considerations there are here. Personally, I always tell my interviewees to like, yes, you should cover that. That is a requirement, but you should not start with that, because then you get into the weeds of like, yes, I maybe need 10 machines or 100 machines, and that might take time away from you from getting an actual solution to the problem. And then you can work on scaling it up, right?
I noticed you did the same thing with the front end. You were just like, I don't want to worry about how many instances right now. Okay.
Yes, exactly. It's just, it is kind of hand waving things, but hopefully you are going to be able to get to an actual solution, to your actual working design. And you are going to have, like, if you focus on that, you most likely are going to have, I don't know, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, even if it's 10 minutes at the end of the interview, where you can actually go back and then say, yes, oh, by the way, we can now do a proper like estimation on the scale of this thing and what we would do to scale it. Because if you think about it, most of the methods, and there are exceptions, but most of the methods that you use to do that, they are actually pretty well known. Like they are pretty well defined, right? Like you do things in a certain way that is well known, like with a minor exception, right? Here probably would be standard things, right? And then because of that, you can both kind of wave it away at the start, but then at the end you can go like all in and then describe things basically by saying that, yes, I will have a load balancers that will talk to all these like different services. I would have an orchestrator to define how many tests I need and all that, right? Did I answer your question?
You did.
Just to be clear on this, I think there were definitely a lot of things that weren't like, I'm asking you to design 3 systems in this, really. I'm asking you to design Google Docs, which in and of itself is a system design interview, asking you to design a remote compiler. And then I'm also asking you to design a recording service that's both audio and textual. So like, this is 3 things. So he literally hand waved as much as he could to get to the meat of every part, which is like the point.
Yeah. So, yeah. While we're on this topic, though, to piggyback off that, I'm sorry, someone's going to say something else.
No, it was just me. I was just going to mention that, like, it is very, very important in any system design interview. Like, it's very important that you do get to a working solution, a working in a fashion, right? By working, I mean, you have an idea of the pitfalls, you address those pitfalls. But at least from my perspective as an interviewer, it is fine to have like a design like this where there is not like a lot of information there, right? and then you cover that later, because it doesn't matter if you start doing deep dives and you never finish the overall design, like you definitely will not get a high recommendation out of the interview. That's not what you want, right? So make sure to do something that work, and then go nuts and flex your distributed system muscles, right? Like show everything that you have. But yeah.
Okay. I have a question, Dima. I have a couple. Let me make sure I'm direct with you. I guess first thing I noticed was that you were kind of going until you found what you were calling searching for the tricky part. So I'm guessing like you had gotten a certain amount of information from Mike and you still felt that there was something he was searching for, or like a difficult point of the design. Like, I guess I'm wondering how you didn't just stop and move on, and if you could talk to your thought process there.
I can give you a high-level answer. It's just I don't get interviewed often, but I interview often. And when I interview, I know time is valuable. So when I see the candidate understand something and I get a hint they understand it, I don't feel the need to probe further. So in a way, I guess subconsciously, I was trying to find the part that Mike really wants to dive into. At the same time, I feel like, so first of all, I'm pretended to be interviewed, right? And you guys are the audience. So I need to make sure I don't jump over too big of a piece. But at the same time, I still think it's far more interesting to dive into something difficult. So otherwise, we end up with a video that is just another tutorial of how to do simple things in simple ways.
To piggyback off that, though, I think you were also doing something that you often do. So I stole this from you a while ago. This is some language you had. We were talking about like how to be proactive when there's a particularly tricky part coming up. And this was the exact wording that you told me. You said, you know, there's a challenge coming up that we're going to face soon. Let me do this thing in the meantime first, and then begin attacking that challenge. For you, like, how much of this is like a time management how much of this for you is a time management strategy?
To a very small degree, and I actually suck at time management. So to me, what I've learned is I actually think I can do far better at mentoring and coaching, but what I've realized is that a properly phrased question is usually more than half the answer. And if my goal is to explain something, it's probably even more important than the actual explanation to frame the problem for the viewers, for the listeners, so that they can begin asking themselves the right sub questions in the right order in their own heads. So I'm carefully trying to mark down the attack surface at the problem, so that we're on the same page with the person I'm speaking with. It's not that I'm trying to manage time. It's just when I see my audience is really following, I could skip over this part. When I'm in the fully mentoring mode, like when I feel a couple of people who are listening, not you guys, just how my mind works. If I feel like I'm giving a lecture to a bunch of interns, my job is to make sure they are entertained and excited and still grasp the depth of the problem space. So I feel the urge to actually, like for myself as well, to make a few circles around the problem to see which angles might be tricky for them later on, so that I don't have to explain them from scratch, but I can always refer back to the angle of attack.
So it's more of a communication strategy, that like you're concerned with what response you get from the person, like when you say that.
I guess so. Yeah, you can think that my brain just adjusted to minimize further follow-up questions. So the better I read the audience, the better I can calibrate, the better I can spend more time at preparation to have the gist to be super clean. But since I often don't know my audience, I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Nice.
I have a quick question for you, Dima. One thing I noticed in the high-level design was kind of not too much focus, or maybe missing a little bit about the audio recording portion, and I definitely know that made it in the initial requirements you hashed out. So just kind of wondering on a high level, what your thoughts are on that, and it kind of like, since you knew about the audio requirement for the interview, why you didn't end up focusing too much on it, I guess.
You mean the part outside the coder pad?
Yeah, outside the coder pad, kind of how we're gonna focus on the audio and get that part of the replayability as well.
Yeah, honestly, audio is probably the trickiest part I can think of, especially when you need to be able to jump between the voice over IP and the actual phone line. That's painful. I confess to trying to avoid the enterprise part of the like database schema when you record the final rankings of the interviewer and the candidate. For the audio, that was probably my number one pick for the most difficult part, and I was prepared to tackle this. And I don't like these problems, to be honest. They are painful and ugly and hard to do right. But thankfully, Mike steered me away from that, and I'm grateful for that. And that's why I kind of cheated not going there.
And to be clear, that there was a little bit of me being a bad interviewer there, because I said, don't worry about voice over IP. And what I meant was like, don't go into those details. And Dima kind of interpreted it as just like, abstracted away. Like it would have been nice to have like a piece saying like, and this is where this would fit in within it. But realistically speaking, like it's a box he would have drawn somewhere and would have been like, and this is where we store our recordings that are magically done for us. I wouldn't have wanted him to deep dive. That's an excellent thing to deep dive on for this particular question when we have a full 60 minutes. And it's one I actually do kind of do with folks, but not here just because there wasn't enough time. So yeah, that was more my fault that he missed it than him.
I know for a fact it's really hard to synchronize audio with video when milliseconds matter. If it's just sound, we can be off by like 0.1 second. So we can just have snapshots, like checkpoints here and there, and we're good.
I don't know if everyone else realized this, but the way Dima designed the Kafka like message queue, and if you know much about Kafka, you know that he can replay the entirety of the text editor events from that. So he actually did tackle like that portion of the recording, whether or not that was intentional or just due to the nature of the message queue. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, but
it
I
was
assume
totally intentional, and it's totally my fault for not verbalizing this. Like, yeah, that's actually one. I know for a fact that's my biggest area of improvement. I make assumptions about what people read between the lines. The main reason I should have made it very clear before. The main reason to use Kafka as a message queue, the main reason to make it to keep it as a source of truth, is that it's replayable. So you can actually treat it as a source of truth, whereas your snapshots or materialized views are derived data entities. Yeah, my bad for not making it extremely clear.
No, it was good. It's almost frustrating. I said this in the chat. It's almost frustrating to interview you because you're just like, oh, everything's so simple because you go through stuff. But then when we try to deep dive into something, it's like clear we don't need a deep dive because like with concurrency, we talked about concurrency with Bruno, and we'll get into the comparison in a second. But for you just said the magic word. It's like, oh, CRDT. It's like, okay, if you know that and you know what that is, it's like, okay, we don't need to talk about concurrency. You clearly have done enough to where we don't have to focus on it. So that's good.
Yeah, I shouldn't talk much about this because I'm under the NDA.
So Brett does have a question, and it's about Docker and how you suggested using Docker. And he says, so is he saying by using Docker it is more concurrent and one process wouldn't delay the other process? So I actually had, I wanted to talk about this more, but we didn't quite have time. But yeah, when you were talking about concurrency in the processes, like what was the delay you were speaking about?
So honestly, it's all about isolation. I like to design systems as if it's 1999, so pre-Docker, in which case it's totally on me to like build my own OS-ish scheduler, so that when your code is misbehaving, it doesn't affect other people's code. Docker is a standard keyword these days to encompass a lot of Linux kernel techniques plus something else, like network, hard drive, CPU limits. So that's like in an interview, there's no reason not to say Docker at this point. Whether it's a good design in practice, more yes than no, although debate can be strong.
Was it partially to do with like, wanting to sandbox the environment for security threats and like not using too much RAM or things like that, killing programs that were just eating through stuff? Great. So yeah, you said Docker, and like, again, I took that to mean like you're sandboxing, and like, that's fine. But I think that was, again, one of those things that you didn't clarify why you did it. So I think some people were confused as to like, why Docker, but you just didn't really describe the benefits. But yeah, your design made total sense.
Yeah, I guess you can think of Lambda as the extreme case of sandboxing, but it's just expensive and slow. So yeah,